Chapter 2 The Vanishing Glass. Nearly 10 years had passed since the Dursleys had woken up to find their nephew on the front step, but Privet Drive had hardly changed at all. The sun rose on the same tidy front gardens and lit up the brass number 4 on the Dursleys' front door. It crept into their living room, which was almost exactly the same as it had been on the night when Mr. Dursley had seen the fateful news report about the owls. Only the photographs on the mantelpiece really showed how much time had passed. 10 years ago, there had been lots of pictures of what looked like a large pink beach ball wearing different colored bonnets. But now Dudley Dursley was no longer a baby. Now the photograph showed a large blond boy riding his first bicycle on a carousel at the fair, playing a computer game with his father, being hugged and kissed by his mother. The room had no sign about another boy lived in the house too. Yes, Harry Potter was still there. Asleep at the moment, but not for long. His Aunt Petunia was awake, and it was her shrill voice that made her first snores of the day. "Up! Get up now! Up!" Harry woke up with a start. His aunt rapped on the door again. "Up!" she screeched. Harry heard her walk into the kitchen, and then the sound of the frying pan being put on the stove. He rolled onto the side and tried to remember the dream that he had been having. It had been a good one. There had been a flying motorcycle in it. He had a funny feeling that he'd had that same dream before. His aunt was back outside the door again. "Are you up yet?" she demanded. "Nearly," said Harry. "Well, get a move on. I want you to look after the bacon, and don't you dare let it burn. I want everything perfect on Doody's birthday." Harry groaned. "What did you say?" his aunt snapped through the door. Nothing. Dudley's birthday. How could he have forgotten? Harry slowly got out of bed and started looking for the socks. He found a pair under his bed, and after pulling a spider off one of them, put them on. Harry was used to spiders, because the cupboard under the stairs was full of them. That was where he slept. When he was dressed, he went down the hall to the kitchen. The table was almost hidden beneath all of Dudley's birthday presents. It looked as though Dudley had gotten the new computer he wanted, and not to mention the second television and the racing bike. Exactly why Dudley wanted a racing bike, Harry didn't know. Because Dudley was very fat and hated exercise. Unless, of course, it involved punching somebody. But Dudley's favorite punching bag was Harry, and he couldn't often catch him. Harry didn't look at it, but he was very fast. Perhaps it had something to do with living in a dark cupboard, but Harry had always been small and skinny for his age. He looked even smaller and skinnier than he really was, because all he had to wear were old clothes of Dudley's. And Dudley was about 4 times bigger than he was. Harry had a thin face, knobbly knees, black hair, and bright green eyes. He wore round glasses held together with a lot of Scotch tape because of the times Dudley had punched him on the nose. The only thing Harry liked about his own appearance was a very thin scar on his forehead that was shaped like a bolt of lightning. He had it as long as he could remember. The first question he could ever remember asking was his Aunt Petunia. Was how he'd gotten it. "In the car crash, when your parents died," she had said, "and don't ask questions." Don't ask questions. That was the very first rule of the quiet life with the Dursleys. Uncle Vernon entered the kitchen as Harry was turning over the bacon. "Comb your hair," he barked, by a way of a morning greeting. About once a week, Uncle Vernon looked over the top of his newspapers and shouted that Harry needed a haircut. Harry must have had more haircuts than the rest of his boys in his class put together. But that made no difference. His hair simply grew that way, all over the place. Harry was frying eggs by the time Dudley arrived in the kitchen with his mother. Dudley looked a lot like Uncle Vernon. He had a large pink face, not much neck, small watery blue eyes, thick blonde hair, and lay smoothly on his thick fat head. Aunt Petunia often said that Dudley looked like a baby angel. Harry often said that Dudley looked like a pig in a wig. Harry put the plates of egg and bacon on the table, which was difficult as there wasn't much room. Dudley, meanwhile, was counting his presents. His face fell. 36, he said, looking up at his mother and father. That's 2 less than last year. Darling, you haven't counted Aunt Marge's present. See, it's here under this big one from Mummy and Daddy. All right, 37 then, said Dudley, going red in the face. Harry, who could see huge Dudley tantrum going on, began waffling down his blanket as fast as possible in case Dudley turned the table over. Aunt Petunia obviously sensed danger too, because she said quickly, We'll buy you another present when we go to the zoo. How's that, Pumpkin? 2 more presents. Is that all right? Dudley thought for a moment. It looked like hard work. Finally, he said slowly, so I'll have 30, 39 sweetens, said Aunt Petunia. Oh. Dudley sat down heavily and grabbed the nearest parcel. All right, then. Uncle Vernon chuckled. Little Tick wants his money worth, just like his father. Attaboy, Dudley. At that moment, the telephone rang, and Aunt Petunia went to answer it, while Harry and Aunt Vernon watched Dudley unwrap the racing bike, a video camera, a remote-control airplane, 16 new computer games, and a VCR. He was ripping the paper off from a gold wristwatch when Aunt Petunia came from behind the telephone, looking both angry and worried. Bad news, Vernon. Mrs. Fig's broken her leg. She can't take him. She jerked her head in Harry's direction. Dudley's mouth fell open in horror. But Harry's heart gave a leap. Every year on Dudley's birthday, his parents took him and a friend out for the day to adventure parks, hamburger restaurants, or the movies. Every year, Harry was left behind with Mrs. Fig, a mad old lady who hated him, who made him look at the photographs of all the cats she'd ever owned. Now what? Said Aunt Petunia, looking fiercely at Harry, as though he'd planned this. Harry ought to feel sorry that Mrs. Fig had broken her leg, but it wasn't easy when he reminded himself it would be a whole year before he had to look at Tibbles, Snowy, Mr. Paws, and Tufty again. We could phone Marge. Don't be silly, Vernon. She hates the boy. Dursleys often spoke about Harry like this, as though he wasn't there, or rather as though he was something very nasty he couldn't understand. Like a slug. What about, what's her name? Your friend, Yvonne? On vacation in Margica, snapped on Petunia. You could just leave me here, Harry put hopefully. He'd be able to watch what he wanted on the TV for a change, and maybe even go on Dudley's computer. Aunt Petunia looked as though she just swallowed a lemon. And come back to find the house in ruins, she snarled. I won't blow up the house, said Harry, but they weren't listening. I suppose we could take him to the zoo, said Aunt Petunia slowly, and leave him in the car. That car's new. He is not sitting in it alone. Dudley began to cry loudly. In fact, he wasn't really crying. It had been years since he'd really cried. But he knew that if he screwed up his face and wailed, that his mother would get him anything. Dinky Duddy Dums, don't cry. Mommy won't let him spoil your special day, she cried, flinging her arms around him. I don't want him to come, Dudley yelled between huge, spoiled, pretend sobs. He always spoils everything. He shot Harry a nasty grin through the gap in his mother's arms. Then the doorbell rang. Oh, good Lord, they're here. And a moment later, Dudley's best friend, Piers Polkiss, walked in with his mother. Piers was a scrawny boy with a face like a rat. He was usually the one who held people's arms behind their backs, while Dudley hit them. Half an hour later, Harry, who couldn't believe in his luck, was sitting in the back of the Dursleys' car with Piers and Dudley, on their way to the zoo for the first time in his life. His aunt and uncle hadn't been able to think of anything else to do with him, but before they'd left, Uncle Vernon had taken Harry aside. I'm warning you, he said, putting his large purple face right up to close to Harry's. I'm warning you now, boy. Any funny business, anything at all, and you'll be in that cupboard from now till Christmas. I'm not going to do anything, said Harry, honestly. But Uncle Vernon didn't believe him. No one ever did. The problem was, strange things often happened around Harry, and it was just no good telling the Dursleys he didn't make them happy. The problem was, once Aunt Petunia, tired of Harry coming back from all the barbers looking as though he hadn't been at all, had taken a pair of kitchen scissors and cut his hair so short he was almost bald, except for his bangs, which she left to hide that horrible scar, she said. Dudley, who laughed at himself silly at Harry, spent a sleepless night imagining school the next day, where he was already laughed at for his baggy clothes and taped glasses. Next morning, however, he had gotten up to find his hair exactly as it had been before Aunt Petunia had sheared it off. He had been given a week in his cupboard for this, even though he tried to explain that he couldn't explain how it had grown back so quickly. Another time, Aunt Petunia had been trying to force him into a revolting old sweater of Dudley's, brown with orange puffballs. The harder she tried to pull it over his head, the smaller it seemed to become, until finally it might have fitted a hand puppet, but certainly wouldn't fit Harry. Aunt Petunia had decided it must have shrunk in the wash, and to his great relief, Harry wasn't punished. On the other hand, he'd gotten into terrible trouble for being found on the roof of school kitchens. Dudley's gang had been chasing him as usual, when, as to much of Harry's surprise as anyone else, there was he sitting on the chimney. The Dursleys had received a very angry letter from Harry's headmistress telling him that Harry had been climbing the school buildings. But all he tried to do, as he shouted at Uncle Vernon through the locked door of his cupboard, was jump behind the big trash cans outside the doors. Harry was supposed that the wind might have caught him mid-jump. But today nothing was going to go wrong. It was even worth being with Dudley and Pierce to be spending the day somewhere else that wasn't a school. His cupboard or Mrs. Fidge's cabbage-smelling living room. While he drove home, Uncle Vernon complained to Aunt Petunia. He liked to complain about things: people at work, Harry, the council, Harry, the bank, and Harry were just a few of his favorite subjects. This morning it was motorcycles. Roaring along like maniacs, the young hoodlums, he said as the motorcycle overtook them. I had a dream about the motorcycle, said Harry, remembering suddenly. It was flying. Uncle Vernon nearly crashed the car into the front. He turned right around the seat and yelled at Harry, his face like a gigantic beet with a mustache. Motorcycles don't fly! Dudley and Pierce sniggered. I know they don't. It was only a dream, said Harry. But he wished he hadn't said anything. If there was one thing the Dursleys hated even more than his asking questions, it was his talking about anything, acting in a way it shouldn't, no matter if it was a dream or even a cartoon. They seemed to think he might be getting dangerous ideas. It was very sunny Saturday, and the zoo was crowded with families. The Dursleys brought Dudley and Pierce large chocolate ice creams at the entrance, and then, because the smiling lady in the van had asked Harry the way he wanted, so before they could hurry him away, they bought him a cheap lemon ice pop. It wasn't bad either, Harry thought, licking it as they watched the gorilla scratching his head, who looked remarkably like Dudley, except that it wasn't blonde. Harry had had the best morning he'd had in a long time. He was careful to walk a little way apart from the Dursleys so that Dudley and Pierce, who were starting to get bored by the animals at lunchtime, wouldn't fall back on their favorite hobby of hitting them. They ate in the zoo restaurant, and when Dudley had a tantrum because his Knickerbocker glory didn't have enough ice cream on top, Uncle Vernon bought him another one, and Harry was allowed to finish the first. Harry felt afterward that he should have known it was all too good to last.